It was 3 a.m. on a freezing January night when Boston police officer John O'Keefe lay still in the snow. The temperature was 8 degrees below zero. Nobody was around to help him. Hours later, someone found him, but it was too late. This isn't just a story about a police officer who died in the cold. It's about his girlfriend Karen Reed, who might have killed him with her car. She says she didn't do it. The police say she did. Karen and John went to a party that night. They had fun, drank some beer, and everything seemed normal. But something went very wrong after they left. The next morning, John was dead in the snow outside his friend's house. The police looked at Karen's car and found a broken tail light. They said she must have hit John with her car and left him there to die. But Karen told everyone a different story. She said some police officers were trying to blame her for something she didn't do. She said they were hiding the truth about what really happened to John. The first time they had a trial, the jury couldn't decide if Karen was guilty or not guilty. They talked and talked, but they just couldn't agree. Now they're going to have another trial to try again. What really happened that cold January night? Did Karen really kill the man she loved, or are the police hiding something bigger? As this story goes on, you'll see that nothing is as simple as it looks. Right now, Karen is waiting for her new trial. She still says she's innocent. The police still say she's guilty. And John's family just wants to know the truth about how he died in the snow that night. The streets of Canton, Massachusetts lay silent under a blanket of snow on January 28, 2022. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees below zero, cold enough to kill. No one knew it then, but these frozen streets would soon become the scene of one of Boston's most talked about cases. John O'Keefe, a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department, started his evening like any other Friday night. His girlfriend of 2 years, Karen Reed, picked him up around 8 p.m. in her black Lexus SUV. They were headed to a party, but first stopped at Waterfall Bar Grill for a drink. Karen ordered a Moscow Mule. John had a beer. They sat at the bar talking about normal things, his work, the nieces and nephews he was raising, weekend plans. The security footage from the bar shows them laughing, comfortable, like any other couple on a Friday night. Nobody could have guessed that in less than 24 hours, John would be dead, and Karen would be facing murder charges. The party they were heading to was at Brian Albert's house, another Boston police officer. By the time they arrived around 11 p.m., the gathering was in full swing. About 20 people filled the house, mostly cops and their partners. The roads were slick with black ice that night, but Karen had driven carefully. She'd had 3 drinks by then, but witnesses would later say she seemed steady on her feet. Inside the party, the scene appeared normal on the surface. Music played. People clustered in small groups, talking about work, sports, their kids. Karen chatted with Jennifer, Brian's wife, about a Netflix show. But there were undercurrents that would later raise questions. Several witnesses noticed Brian stepping outside frequently to check his phone. Others remembered strange looks passing between Jennifer and her sister. And some partygoers would later recall how certain conversations stopped when Karen walked by. At 12:30 a.m., Karen said she wasn't feeling well. She decided to head home alone. John wanted to stay. Brian had just opened a special bottle of whiskey. Karen kissed him goodbye and promised to text when she got home. It was the last time anyone saw John O'Keefe alive and well. What happened next would become the subject of intense debate, multiple investigations, and a trial that would split the Boston law enforcement community. The official version claims Karen Reed backed her SUV into John, leaving him to die in the snow from his injuries and the cold. But as investigators dug deeper, they found pieces that didn't fit this simple narrative. The timeline had holes. A security camera at a crucial corner had mysteriously stopped working that night. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. Text messages disappeared from multiple phones. And perhaps most troubling, certain evidence bags never made it to the crime lab. When they found John's body at 6 a.m. on January 29th, he was face down in the snow with massive head trauma. Near his body, investigators found pieces of a broken tail light. Karen's Lexus had a broken tail light. To many, it seemed like an open and shut case. But nothing about this case would prove simple. As detectives processed the scene, other activities were taking place across Canton. High-ranking officers held hushed phone conversations. Quick meetings happened in parking lots. Reports were written and rewritten. A narrative was taking shape, but was it the truth? The hours between midnight and 6 a.m. became a black hole in the timeline. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything. In a neighborhood full of people, on a still winter night when sound carries far, not a single witness reported hearing a car accident or calls for help. The investigation moved quickly, perhaps too quickly, some would later say. Karen Reed was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. But as prosecutors built their case, questions kept surfacing. Why weren't certain witnesses interviewed? What explained the missing hour in the timeline? And why did some officers who were at the party suddenly have trouble remembering basic details about that night? The case touched on sensitive issues within the Boston Police Department. Old alliances, unwritten rules. The thin blue line that officers weren't supposed to cross. John O'Keefe had been on the force for 16 years. He knew things, departmental secrets, personal matters, information that some people might want to keep buried. When Karen's case finally went to trial, the jury faced a complex web of evidence, testimony, and contradictions. They couldn't reach a verdict. The result was a mistrial, but it left everyone with questions. What really happened on that frozen January night? Was this a simple drunk driving tragedy or something darker? As Karen Reed awaits her retrial in January 2025, new details keep emerging. Witnesses have started changing their stories. Documents have surfaced that conflict with the official timeline. And somewhere in Canton, Massachusetts, the truth about what happened to John O'Keefe remains hidden beneath layers of snow, secrets, and silence. The investigation into John O'Keefe's death began at dawn on January 29th. The medical examiner's findings painted a clear picture of his final moments: blunt force trauma to the head, defensive scratches on his arms, and the telltale signs of hypothermia. While these injuries matched what you'd expect from a vehicle strike, the bruising patterns told a more complex story, one that didn't completely fit with a simple car accident. The black Lexus EV belonging to Karen Reed quickly became the investigation's centerpiece. Its damaged tail light caught investigators' attention, especially when fragments found at the scene matched the broken pieces perfectly. They noted paint transfers on O'Keefe's clothing that matched the Lexus's color, and the vehicle's GPS data put it in the area between midnight and 1 a.m., during the critical period when O'Keefe was last seen alive. The final text messages between the couple seemed ordinary enough. At 12:14 a.m. O'Keefe sent, "Leaving soon. Love you." Reed replied 3 minutes later, "Okay, text when you get home." After that, O'Keefe's phone fell silent. When police found his body, it lay 25 feet from Brian Albert's front door. A trail of blood drops marked the snow from the driveway to where he was found. 2 sets of footprints told their own story. One matched O'Keefe's shoes, but the other set remained unidentified. The neighborhood's security cameras should have captured everything, but they didn't. The most crucial camera, positioned at 13 Fairview Road with a direct view of the scene, stopped recording at 11:58 p.m. Investigators discovered its power had been manually cut. Only one camera, 2 houses down, managed to capture anything useful: footage of a vehicle matching Reed's Lexus leaving the area at 1:06 a.m. Phone records revealed a flurry of late-night communication. Brian Albert called Jennifer's sister at 1:48 a.m., followed by 3 calls to another officer from the party at 2:03 a.m. At 2:37 a.m., Albert spent 12 minutes on the phone with his supervisor. By 4:15 a.m., party attendees were exchanging text messages that would later be deleted from their phones. Cell tower data tracked Karen Reed's movements with precision. Her phone placed her at the party until 12:30 a.m., then traced her journey home, arriving at 1:27 a.m. She didn't leave again until 5:48 a.m., after learning about O'Keefe. O'Keefe's posthumous toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.12 and trace amounts of prescription medication. The search of Reed's home turned up her clothes from that night, still bearing traces of snow. Her phone contained deleted messages, and investigators found prescription medication matching what was in O'Keefe's system. The crime lab's analysis painted a mixed picture. DNA under O'Keefe's fingernails didn't match Reed, but fibers on his clothing matched her car's interior. Blood spatter analysis suggested he was standing when struck, though tire track analysis proved useless due to snow conditions. Witness statements from the party created more questions than answers. 5 people changed their stories about Reed's sobriety level. 3 couldn't agree on when they last saw O'Keefe. 2 reported hearing a car but at different times. 4 party guests left before giving statements to police. Adding to the confusion, some DNA samples were improperly stored, chain of custody documents showed gaps, and key blood evidence lacked proper documentation. The prosecution built their case around the vehicle damage matching O'Keefe's injuries, Reed's presence at the scene, and physical evidence linking her car to the impact. The defense focused on the incomplete DNA evidence, the missing security footage, inconsistent witness statements, and questionable evidence handling. The investigation timeline showed troubling gaps: 4 hours of missing security footage, 45 minutes unaccounted for in Reed's movements, and 3 hours where O'Keefe's location couldn't be confirmed. Several critical questions remained unanswered. The source of additional injuries on O'Keefe's body couldn't be explained by a car impact alone. The second set of footprints in the snow was never identified. Nobody could explain why the security camera was disconnected, or why text messages vanished from multiple phones. Most troubling was the 45-minute gap in the timeline, a period when anything could have happened in the dark, cold streets of Canton. The courthouse in Norfolk County filled with tension as Karen Reed's trial began. The prosecution opened with a straightforward theory: Reed, impaired from drinking, backed her SUV into O'Keefe and left him to die in the freezing cold. They painted a picture of a woman who chose to drive home despite her intoxication, made a fatal mistake, and fled the scene. State Prosecutor Adam Lally presented the physical evidence first. He showed the jury photographs of O'Keefe's injuries alongside images of Reed's damaged Lexus. Paint chips from the broken tail light matched perfectly with fragments found at the scene. Blood stains on O'Keefe's clothing contained traces of automotive paint matching Reed's vehicle. The prosecution argued these pieces formed an unbreakable chain linking Reed to O'Keefe's death. But the defense team, led by David Yannetti, had a different story to tell. They focused on what they called convenient gaps in the investigation. Why did the security camera stop working at the exact time it might have captured crucial evidence? Who made the series of phone calls between police officers in the early morning hours? And most importantly, why weren't other possible scenarios investigated? The trial took an unexpected turn when Jennifer Albert, the party host's wife, took the stand. Her testimony differed significantly from her initial police statement. She now remembered seeing O'Keefe inside the house later than previously reported, closer to 1 a.m. This new timeline conflicted with cell tower data showing Reed's phone already at her home by then. Officer Michael Sullivan's testimony raised more questions. He'd been at the party and was one of the last to see O'Keefe alive. Under cross-examination, Sullivan admitted to deleting text messages from that night, claiming it was routine phone maintenance. The defense seized on this, pointing out that several other officers at the party had also deleted their messages. The medical examiner's testimony proved crucial. While the head trauma was consistent with a vehicle impact, other injuries on O'Keefe's body suggested additional trauma. Bruising patterns on his arms and torso indicated he might have been in a physical altercation before the fatal injury. The prosecution hadn't addressed these inconsistencies in their theory. DNA evidence became another contentious point. The genetic material under O'Keefe's fingernails didn't match Reed. But the crime lab never ran it against other potential suspects. The defense argued this showed tunnel vision in the investigation, focusing solely on Reed while ignoring other possibilities. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a neighbor's security camera that captured audio from that night. While too far to show the actual scene, it recorded the sounds of two separate vehicle movements, not just one. The prosecution hadn't included this evidence in their initial discovery, leading to heated arguments about potential evidence suppression. The trial's most dramatic moment came during the testimony of Thomas Walsh, another officer present at the party. Under intense questioning, Walsh's recollection of events began to crumble. He couldn't explain why his phone records showed a call to Brian Albert at the exact time he claimed to be helping search for O'Keefe. When pressed about his location during the critical time window, Walsh invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. Weather experts testified about the extreme conditions that night. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees below zero, with wind chill making it even colder. Someone left in these conditions would lose consciousness within hours. This testimony raised questions about the exact time of O'Keefe's death, as the medical examiner couldn't pinpoint it precisely due to the cold's effects on the body. The prosecution's timeline had more holes than they could explain away. They couldn't account for the 45-minute gap in Reed's movements, but they also couldn't prove O'Keefe was struck during that time. The defense highlighted how investigators failed to collect surveillance footage from several nearby businesses that might have captured Reed's drive home. As the trial progressed, jurors heard from forensic experts about the blood spatter analysis. The pattern suggested O'Keefe was standing when first struck, but some blood evidence indicated he'd moved or been moved after the initial injury. This didn't match the prosecution's theory that Red hit him with her car and immediately left. The defense's final argument centered on police accountability. They presented evidence of previous instances where the Boston Police Department had closed ranks to protect their own. They suggested O'Keefe, a veteran officer, might have learned something at the party that made him a threat to certain colleagues. Why did the security camera stop working at such a crucial moment? What explained the unidentified DNA and the second set of footprints? The jury debated for days but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. Some were convinced by the physical evidence linking Reed's car to O'Keefe's death. Others couldn't get past the unexplained gaps in the investigation and the strange behavior of other officers that night. The judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial. The mistrial sent shockwaves through the Boston law enforcement community. Karen Reed walked out of the courthouse neither guilty nor innocent, while the district attorney's office immediately announced plans for a retrial. New information kept surfacing after the trial. 3 more residents near the crime scene came forward with security footage they hadn't previously shared. Their cameras had captured snippets of activity on nearby streets during the crucial time window. One recording showed 2 vehicles leaving the area within minutes of each other. Only one matched the description of Reed's Lexus. The Massachusetts State Police opened an internal review of how the original investigation was handled. They focused on the missing evidence, particularly the disconnected security camera and deleted text messages. The review revealed that standard procedures hadn't been followed in securing the crime scene. The first officers who arrived that morning were all colleagues who had been at the party, creating an immediate conflict of interest. Inside the Boston Police Department, divisions deepened. Some officers stood firmly behind the prosecution's version of events. Others began quietly questioning the official narrative. An anonymous letter circulated within the department alleged that O'Keefe had been looking into suspicious activities involving fellow officers in the weeks before his death. The crime lab released updated findings on the unidentified DNA found under O'Keefe's fingernails. While it didn't match anyone in the criminal database, it shared enough markers to suggest the person was related to someone at the party. This revelation sparked new questions about who else might have been present that night. Financial records showed unusual patterns in the weeks before O'Keefe's death. He had withdrawn large sums of cash from his accounts and made several calls to the department's internal affairs division. His personal laptop, which went missing after his death, still hasn't been found. The Canton Police Department's records revealed another detail initially overlooked. A noise complaint had been called in from a house 2 streets over at 12:45 a.m. that night. The responding officer, who had also attended the party earlier, marked it as resolved without filing a detailed report. Media coverage intensified as more details emerged. Journalists uncovered connections between party attendees and other controversial cases within the Boston Police Department. Several officers who were present that night had been involved in previous incidents where evidence had gone missing or witnesses had changed their statements. The missing 45 minutes in Reed's timeline took on new significance when cell tower data showed other phones in the area had also gone dark during the same period. Technical experts suggested this pattern could indicate the use of a signal jamming device equipment that shouldn't have been accessible to civilians. Jennifer Albert changed her story again in a sworn affidavit. She now claimed to have seen O'Keefe arguing with someone in the driveway around 1 a.m., but she couldn't identify the other person. The medical examiner's office released additional details about O'Keefe's injuries. Some of the bruising patterns matched defensive wounds typically seen in hand-to-hand fights. This supported the theory that O'Keefe had been in an altercation before the fatal injury occurred. As preparations for a retrial moved forward, the case exposed deeper issues within law enforcement. Questions arose about the thin blue line, the unwritten code of silence among police officers. Some wondered if this code had influenced the investigation from the start. The Canton community remained divided. Signs supporting both Karen Red and the Boston Police Department appeared in windows and yards. Local officials faced pressure to bring in outside investigators for the retrial, acknowledging that too many questions remained unanswered. O'Keefe's nieces and nephews, the children he had been raising, still waited for closure. Their guardian told reporters they just wanted to know the truth about what happened to their uncle that cold January night. But the truth seemed buried under layers of conflicting stories, missing evidence, and unspoken police department secrets. The case now stands as a symbol of larger issues and law enforcement questions about accountability, transparency, and the challenges of investigating crimes involving police officers. As Karen Red awaits retrial, the death of John O'Keefe remains officially unsolved. His last night raises questions that extend far beyond a single incident in Canton, touching on issues of police loyalty, departmental politics, and the price of breaking the code of silence.